Hey guys, hello gorgeous. A couple days ago I did a video about my own personal thoughts on the firing of Steve Whitmire as the voice and puppeteer of Kermit the Frog. I don't usually do news updates on this channel because I just don't like to follow that stuff. It seems like a lot of drama to me, but I wanted to share my thoughts about that particular situation because it seemed to me, even though I didn't have all of the facts, Steve seemed like a really sweet guy to me, and Disney, which owns the Muppets, they purchased it from the Jim Henson Company in 2004. It seemed to me like they were just doing the standard thing that most corporations do, and that's keep rolling right along to make money and run over the little guy, no matter how much heart he has. So I also wanted to do a video on that because I was really impressed with the class that Steve Whitmire or Whitmere, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, was showing. Because he could have thrown stones, but he waited so long to make an announcement about it, and then when he did, it didn't seem to me like he was throwing stones. It seemed like he wanted to work things out. He wanted what was genuinely best for the character. And having followed the Muppets from the Jim Henson era, and then after his passing, listening to the story of how Steve took over the role and how much it meant to him, that it wasn't just a job, but that it meant so much to him, and that he always carried the character as not just a character of the Muppets, but a little piece of Jim Henson, a piece of the soul of Jim Henson. I think he said something to the effect of, you don't just perform Kermit, you have to step into Jim's soul to perform the character. It seems to me like what Disney wants and what a lot of corporations want with their iconic characters is to just have the actor play the damn role. It's just a job. Just do your goddamn job and stop being so flaky. And as I mentioned in the first video, it's a dichotomy. It's a paradox because so many times these people in suits that own these beloved characters, they make all the money and they make all the decisions about the characters, and they don't seem to understand what makes those characters loved. Here's a challenge for you. How many people in a suit that carry a suitcase do you love? Like throughout history, whether it's pop culture or historic figures, how many of those stereotypical business suit type of people, corporate characters, do you love that really spoke something inside to you? And then to juxtapose, how many people have touched your heart that didn't look all that corporate and business professional? You know, jeans, t-shirts, maybe long hair, who knows? Something to ponder. A few more details have come out though, so I wanted to do a follow-up video on it. Not looking to create more drama. It's an interesting story to me, and I was really impressed with how Whitmire responded to the situation. And so, because a few more details have come out, he didn't share any details on why he was terminated. It seemed to me like he was taking the high road. And so Disney has had a chance to respond, and I don't believe that they've taken the high road as Steve did. I think some stones are being thrown here, and this video isn't a redaction. I'm not going back and changing my stance on anything. I stand by what I said. My feelings on it haven't changed. My feelings can change. I've said in other reviews and on Armchair Directors with movies, watching the trailer first and then watching the movie. I've always said if new information comes to light, I can change how I feel. How you feel is a present thing. It's in the moment. And changing your mind shouldn't be something that's discouraged. If something changes, then you can change. It's perfectly fine to do that. But after listening to Disney's or reading Disney's response and some of the tactics they've employed to respond to Steve. Um, it, I think it paints that picture of corporations that I tried to paint, that I tried to describe in my first video. So I just wanted to go over some of the things that they brought up in their response and um, ask a few questions myself. So here to help me with these questions, I have a guest on the show. It's very rare that someone joins me on here. This is my solo channel, but joining me on the show is this guy. Say hi, Kermit. He's what? You're not very talkative today? What's wrong? You got a person in your throat? Anyways, Kermit, we're going to discuss some of the, you just got to smile when a Muppet is around. We're going to discuss some of the things that Disney brought up. The two reasons that, very good, that Disney cited for releasing Steve Whitmire is, one of them was a union issue, which always gets sticky when it comes to Kermit. You're throwing me off here. Stop waving at the people, okay? I'm going to put you aside for just 1 second. I'm going to bring you in when I have my questions, okay? Okay, perfect. So the two reasons why it's just hard to focus when you got a Muppet around. They're so Muppety. They're so Muppety. So the two reasons that Disney gave for Whitmire being released, one of them was a union issue, which, again, I don't know the intimate details of the situation, but I know from experience, from seeing other people go through it, and some of my own personal experiences, when a big company makes a decision, that's final. And they will do and find whatever they need in order to support that decision. And so this union issue that came up with Mr. Whitmire, Steve said that he addressed it. He did it. It was some sort of a thing that was preventing him from doing a commercial. He did it anyway. He worked out a special deal with the union. He resolved it, and everything was fine. But apparently that was one of the things that was a pain in Disney's ass. And they don't want a pain in the ass. They just want someone who will shut up and do the job. Not step into the soul of Jim Henson. They just want someone who will do the job. So that was the first issue. The other issue is the one that there's going to be a lot of differing opinions on it, depending on how outspoken you are, how much of a free thinker you are, or how much of a sheep you are. The other thing was that they cited that Steve Whitmire gave feedback, that he was difficult to work with. And I'm of the camp that believes that he is completely within his right to do that. But then again, I'm not, when I was making films and videos, I wasn't a traditional type of filmmaker. I remember one of the first things that I ever did was a short film called White, and we were so lucky to have a professional actor on the set, and most of his career he had spent as a stuntman, but he also worked as an actor and a director too. A lot of you will recognize him from, he was in the X-Men, the original 2000 X-Men movie, when Magneto pulls the guns out of all the cops' hands and turns the guns back at them. He's one of the cops that steps back and is being threatened by his own gun floating in the air. So it's a quick shot. He doesn't have any lines, but he's in there, he's doing stunts, and he was on a lot of projects. So we were lucky to have him as a performer in our movie. And after being in the movie industry for decades, he had been beaten down so much that he was afraid to tell a bunch of dipshit, stupid ass, uninformed, uneducated kids. He was afraid to speak his voice among us. We didn't know what the hell we were doing. And he would stand there, and I could see him thinking, but he didn't want to say anything because he was conditioned to shut the hell up and do your job. And I would ask him, what's up? What's up, Randy? And he was so careful. He didn't want to step on toes because of a career of dealing with people who were too sensitive, a career of dealing with egos, massive egos out of control. There's just no way to speak to a person like that. It's like navigating a minefield. It's better to just shut the hell up. But I encouraged him, and I wanted to know. I wanted to learn. I said, "You have the experience. I have none. Teach me. Teach us. Speak up. What's the big deal? The worst that can happen is that I say no. Thanks for the suggestion, but no." And he came up with a lot of great shots for cinematography, for how to shoot certain things, for even how it would be edited later on in the editing stage. And so I think about that when I think about what a ruckus these notes that Steve Whitmire caused. The guy had been performing Kermit the Frog for so many years. He is the second Kermit. There's only been two. The first was the beloved Jim Henson. And it seemed like he had to do even sort of a spiritual experience in order to perform the character. He didn't just stick a puppet on his hand and do it. His story about how he put the puppet in the closet and he couldn't look at it, he couldn't do it because he was just so grief-stricken by the passing of Jim Henson, and also knowing that even though Jim was gone, Jim was still here, and that's Jim right there. Every time we see Jim is in all of the Muppets, but especially Kermit. As far as the notes go that Whitmire was providing, you got to wonder, well, what are these notes that caused such a ruckus? And you would think that they would be extremely disrespectful and demanding as the picture is being painted. But one of the examples that Whitmire has given is that during that Muppets show that was on last year, the one that was kind of like The Office, Kermit and Miss Piggy broke up, and the situation was that Kermit was lying to his adorable little nephew Robin about the breakup, and Whitmire said Kermit wouldn't lie to Robin to spare his feelings. What's the big deal? Who cares? But you have to understand that your world, the world that you live in, is different from the world that these people who do these movies and TV shows live in. Their world is filled with eggshells, and you have to be so careful, like Randy Butcher was on my short film. Even with young, first-time or few-time filmmakers, you have to be so careful to not hurt feelings. And it's ironic that that is what the scene was, and it speaks volumes. And it's not just about the show, it's about the world in general. And it's not going to change. I come from a time where people weren't that sensitive, where people could play practical jokes, some vicious practical jokes on each other. They could say a lot of things without having people emotionally devastated. I think the reason that people are so sensitive today and take so much damage from things that are said to them that are unpleasant is because of an overinflated ego. I come from a time where a lot of people would just let things roll off their back, like water off a duck's back. Who cares? I don't care who's saying it. You take a good look at who's saying it and you go, I don't give a crap what you say. And that's something that I still employ to this day on everything I do in my life, especially when it comes to YouTube, whether it's Armchair Director's movie reviews or my own reviews. If someone speaks up and says something unpleasant about me, it rolls off my back like water off a duck's back, because my initial thought is, who are you? What have you done? Why does your opinion matter? It doesn't. You've done nothing to earn any respect, and your opinion has no value whatsoever. So little value that it doesn't even warrant a response. So I don't reply to these things. I just block, block, block. And I wish more people would do that. But that scene that caused such a kerfuffle, they wanted Kermit's nephew to be lied to spare his feelings, because that's how people, a lot of people, are today. Lie to me to spare my feelings. Don't hurt my feelings. Tell me a beautiful lie instead of the ugly truth. And I applaud Steve Whitmire for saying, no, that's not the way that it should be. Because we come from an earlier generation where it wasn't like that, and people seem to be generally happier, less stress, less anxiety, whereas today this constant futile effort to spare everybody's feelings, to be nice to everybody, uh, to the point of lying, uh, I think is creating some very unstable people, some very thin-skinned people, people who are more susceptible to devastating reactions to what's being said to them than in the past. And, I just think of the increase in suicide rates. I think it's connected to that it's becoming a lost art, letting things just roll off your back and genuinely, again, that word is so important, genuinely moving on, letting it go and not letting it affect you. Because just saying, oh, I don't care, but having it bother you in here, um, it doesn't do any good to just say it. You have to genuinely feel it. And in order to genuinely feel it, you have to do the work. And the work is training, it's repetition. It's like any other thing you get good at. Any athlete, in order to be great, in order to be a champion at something, does it over and over and over to the point where it's muscle memory, where it's not even an effort anymore. It's just the muscle has been trained and does it automatically. And if you take these types of abusive comments or criticisms, mean-spirited, ugliness over and over, and you just are aware of who's saying it, and you always look very with scrutiny at the person saying it, you start to see a pattern, and you start to see that it's the ugly people who say ugly things. It's the people without any empathy who say these vicious, mean-spirited things. And if you train and train and train for years, then can you imagine what it would be like to live your life? To have someone say, you're a piece of crap, go to hell, I hate your guts, you're an idiot, and have no effect whatsoever. To not disrupt your pace whatsoever. To genuinely go, who are you? And keep going, and not like have that little tiny thing inside you go, oh, well, I want to get him. I want to get him. To not desire revenge, to not feel the need to respond because you have just trained so long and so hard that you genuinely see it for what it is, and it is literally not worth your time or effort. So my first question is, if a bunch of writers who have never written for the Muppets, never dealt with the Muppets before, are given a Muppets project, they're hired by Disney to do a job, not to do a passion, not to love something, and not to pour their soul into it, but to do a job, do a goddamn job so that we can make a lot of money. So these writers are hired. What makes the writer, my first question is, what makes the writer think that you can write this and have absolutely no feedback from somebody who has performed the character for a very long time, much longer than you have? What makes you think that you don't even have the time to listen to the suggestion? It's not like you have to do what the performer is telling you to do, but what makes you think that you have the stock, that you have the pedigree to not have to even tolerate listening to any suggestions whatsoever? No response? He's still not very talkative. Another thing that Disney has done, and it's a very clever tactic, and it's going to work on a lot of people, is that they have brought in the Henson family. This is very clever. This corporation purchased the Muppets, not all of the Henson puppets and franchises. The Henson Company still owns Fraggle Rock. They still own Dark Crystal. But the Muppets have been sold off, splintered off, sold off to Disney. So Disney buys the Muppets from the Henson Company. And they don't want anything else. And they don't employ Henson's kids. Henson's kids still run the Jim Henson Company. So I guess my second question is, why did Disney buy the Muppets, but the Hensons didn't come along with them? Hmm. So it seems like they're using the Henson's comments to support their decision. Disney is a big corporation and they're very worried about image, especially with something like these cute little guys. You don't want to turn this into something ugly. You want to keep it sweet and pure like this guy always kept it. And I should mention that Jim Henson did commercials earlier on in his career, but when the Muppets started appearing on Sesame Street, he said, "That's it. We're not hawking products anymore," and he turned down a lot of money. That should be known that he turned down lots and lots of money because of his integrity and his morals. And if you just have that in you, it burns in you, and it's deafening. And all the money in the world, or most of it, isn't going to silence that. And I always looked up to Jim Henson for having that integrity, for having no price. But even though Disney purchased the Muppets from Henson's kids and did not employ Henson's kids, Henson's children are speaking up now, and Disney is using that as a way to support their decision. I'm going to read Cheryl Henson, Jim Henson's daughter. I'm going to read her comment on the situation, and she says, "Steve's version of history is ridiculously self-serving. My father never asked him to perform Kermit. My brother Brian did. Steve's performance of Kermit has strayed away from my father's good-hearted, compassionate leader of the Muppets. Steve performed Kermit as a bitter, angry, depressed victim. Worst of all, in the past few years, he had not been not funny or fun. Recasting Kermit is long overdue. Stop with the pity party! Exclamation mark. Let's get back to the true spirit of Jim Henson's Kermit." So that's one opinion. I have a different opinion. I don't see it that way at all. I don't think Kermit was bitter, angry, a depressed victim. Kermit has always been snide, good-hearted. Obviously, we love Kermit, but he's got a little bit of an attitude. But that's not at all how I saw Kermit. And I recently rewatched some old Kermit footage of Jim Henson performing on the Carson Show. There's one in particular where Kermit is exactly that. So it's ironic to me that Cheryl accuses Whitmire's performance of being that when her own father, who built the company that she runs right now, and that's how she pays the bills and puts food on the table, her own father performed Kermit exactly like that. If you find that clip on YouTube, it's the one where Carson asks Kermit about his love life, and he says, "I'm on Sesame Street. Don't ask me about that." He is extremely grumpy in that clip. And then another interesting one is one of Henson's final interviews, and he brought Kermit along with him on Arsenio Hall, one of the final interviews he did before his untimely passing. And Kermit is pretty depressing in that one as well. I remember first time I watched it and the last time I watched that particular interview. You see a Muppet and you smile. Oh, what's he going to do? What funny thing is he going to say? And instead, he was sad, tired, and kind of depressing, to be honest with you. So that's another one of my questions. Cheryl, have you watched some of your father's performances as Kermit? Brian Henson also chimed in with a few unkind comments, saying, "I have to say, in hindsight, I feel pretty guilty that I burdened Disney by not having recast Kermit at that point because I knew that it was going to be a real problem. And I have always offered that if they wanted to recast Kermit, I was all for it, and I would absolutely help. I'm very glad we have done this now. I think the character is better served to remove this destructive energy around it." So Brian Henson is the one that chose Steve Whitmire as the voice of Kermit the Frog when Jim Henson passed away. I guess another one of my questions is, why didn't Brian Henson take over the role? It just seems strange to me that the Hensons can sell off the Muppet property, but they still have a say. That's not how business works, and Disney is trying to make the most money possible by doing business, and what they've done with Steve Whitmire is pure business. Goodbye, see you later. They're going to get someone new who's much cheaper. He might be a totally different performance. He might be the exact same performance. Who knows? But that's business. And business is also that once you buy a company or a property from somebody else, they're done. They don't get a say in how you run your business. And Disney has done whatever they wanted with the Muppets. But in this situation, it's strange to me that when it seems like they might be under fire because people love Kermit, and a lot of people will credit some of that to Steve Whitmire and his performance and how much he cared about the character. Disney shouldn't be allowed to go back and ask the Hensons, "What do you think? What's your opinion on it?" Because they don't own the Muppets anymore. As far as I know, they're not working on the Muppets anymore. So what is it? Are they stockholders? It just seems strange to me that they get to chime in on this situation when they're not involved anymore. Now, Henson's children, when they're criticized for selling the Muppets off because they were such a large part of their father's legacy, to defend their decision, Jim Henson's children, they always say that Jim was in the process of selling the Muppets at the time of his death, and that's absolutely true. Jim Henson was going to sell the Muppets to Disney in 1990. They had been working on a deal, but what Henson's children leave out, and I think this is very important to this entire story, is that Jim Henson was part of the deal. This is not like when George Lucas sold Star Wars to Disney. Disney was going to get the Muppets, ownership of the Muppets, but Jim Henson was a huge part of the deal. He would come along, he would work under Disney, he would have creative input, creative control. It would be Jim Henson's Muppets still. The Lucas situation is kind of ridiculous, that the company is still called Lucasfilm, even though Lucas doesn't run it, he doesn't own it, he doesn't have any input whatsoever. Disney clearly illustrated that by wiping their butt with his synopsises for the sequel trilogy. He's out. They don't care what he thinks unless he loves the movies. And then you can better believe that he'll be doing all sorts of interviews airing on Disney-owned stations, in papers, websites, and he'll be invited to Star Wars weekends and all sorts of media things if he loves the movie. But when it comes to the Henson Company, the deal did not go through. The story that the Henson children are presenting is that they couldn't go through with it because their father died, and that's devastating. I'm not taking anything away from that. That's a very difficult thing and takes a long time to move past, if you ever do. That'll leave a scar that most people deal with for the rest of their life. But I don't think that it's right that the way they present that story is that they couldn't go through with the deal because they were heartbroken because their father died. Because the story that the president of Disney gave around the time that Henson passed away was that Henson was the deal. It wasn't just for Muppets, it was for Henson. It was for his creative input, for his heart, and for his soul. I guess another instance of a guy wearing a business suit, not getting it, but wanting it, wanting to own it, wanting to financially support it, and saying, just go and do your magic. Even though I don't know how you do it, and I don't understand how you do it, just go and do it. We support you. And when Jim Henson passed away, that deal fell through because this, without the right puppeteer, is just felt it's nothing. There's nothing to it. It needs to have the right spirit beside it, underneath it, flowing through it. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was Whitmire did appear on the Today Show to address the issues. And I got to say, again, I'm really impressed with his poise and his grace. There's this really ugly picture that's been painted of him, that he was difficult to work with, that he threw his weight around, that he put his chest out and said, I'm Kermit and this isn't happening without Kermit. So I'm always asking, recommending, challenging people to try to look a little deeper, think for yourself. Don't let your mind be made up by someone else very quickly because you don't have time or you're too tired. Um, get all the facts and weigh them yourself and see what you feel. Ponder it, wrestle with it, let it percolate. And after watching Whitmire, I've seen other interviews with Steve Whitmire, but watching that one, he was really under fire in that interview. Um, he seems to me like a really genuine person. And one of the things that he mentioned was that when Disney was letting him go, they were going to honor him with a Disney Legends Award and all sorts of other honors and admiration and appreciation, but he had to sign a non-disclosure deal. And the word he used was disingenuous. And I don't know a lot of people in the entertainment industry who use the word disingenuous or genuine, because as I've said in some of my other videos, um, actors, performers, it's all about being disingenuous. The best actors are the best fakes. I've said it time and time again. The best actors are the ones who can pretend to feel something that they're not feeling, or they can feel it. They actually feel it, but then they shut it off, which isn't really feeling it. Unfortunately, some don't know how to shut it off, and that leads to self-destruction. But it was a strange setting to watch this guy who seems very genuine, Steve Whitmire, with these talking head talk show hosts who talk a certain way and da 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 da, and there's nothing genuine about them. And one of the guys asks Steve, "Do you think you're damaging the image of the Muppets by bringing up this ugliness?" And I think that's just so silly, uh, because here's another question: do you ignore the truth if it hurts or it's uncomfortable? I don't. I appreciate the truth, and rarely the truth is sweet. More often than not, I find the truth hurts or is at least uncomfortable, and I think it's absolutely silly to say, "Why are you bringing this up? The Muppets are fun," and I think it speaks volumes about the person who asks that question. It says something about how he lives his life and what is of value to him. Uh, a comfort addict. You see them a lot in life, and their purpose in life is to have fun, to be comfortable, and to sweat as little as possible, to make as few sacrifices as possible, to just stay away from the unpleasantness. All of my heroes are the ones who charged headlong into unpleasantness. So that's exactly what Steve Whitmire is doing, and he waited on this. He pondered it for quite a while, several months. He kept quiet, and then his first public statement on it, I thought, had so much class and grace and respect. And in response, I think some people have thrown stones. They've said some really ugly comments, and I think the ugly comments are a reflection of the people speaking them. So I just wanted to follow up on my original video to say that Steve Whitmire still at this point seems to have a lot of poise, a lot of grace about the situation. He's said things like, "I was in shock," and that he was very hurt by the decision, but he seems like a really strong person to me, with a really strong character. He believes in what he believes in, and sometimes you got to fight a battle even if you have no chance in hell of winning it. That's why King Leonidas of Sparta is one of my heroes, because he charged into a battle that he couldn't win. But sometimes surviving isn't winning. And Steve is up against a giant corporation that's using these underhanded tactics, in my opinion, such as going back to Henson's children and saying, well, the Henson children think he's horrible. The Henson children hate him. And that'll work for a lot of people. A lot of people will listen to, well, what do the Henson kids think? Oh, but what those people should think about is that children are very rarely exactly like their parents. It's very rare that a child is the exact same type of heart and soul and integrity and class as the parent. And I can honestly say, like, I've watched so many Jim Henson interviews. I've read so many things on Jim Henson. I can't imagine Jim Henson saying the things or writing the things that Cheryl and Brian have said or written about Steve Whitmire. There's a classier way to do it, and I just saw no class whatsoever in their opinions on it. My opinion is that the apples fell pretty far from the tree, but how could they not? Jim Henson was a very special human being. He passed away in 1990, and I still get choked up thinking about him. He's one of those guys that was a performer, he was an entertainer, but he really touched, my heart and soul, a lot like Adam West. He was one of the genuine, special guys, and I hope that he continues to live through Kermit. I hope that no matter what happens with the character of Kermit the Frog, whether it's Steve Whitmire returning or if it's Matt Vogel, or maybe Matt Vogel will be thrown to the wayside because of backlash, and that would be unfortunate. But whatever happens, we can still remember that Jim Henson was a special human being, that he imbued that specialness into Kermit the Frog. Just Google Jim Henson and Kermit sometimes. You'll see some of the most heartwarming pictures of Jim hugging Kermit. It wasn't just, this is my tool to make money to feed my kids. Kermit the Frog was something that Jim Henson poured his love into. So hopefully that continues, but I'm realistic, and I do understand that like Star Wars, the Muppets are owned by a corporation. And a lot of the time, corporations don't have time for heart and soul. They just want you to do your job, get it over with, do your job. And so in that case, it's like, again, Star Wars. I can pop in the original trilogy anytime I want, and I can pop in the old Muppet Show or the old Muppet movies anytime I want. Got an opinion on the Muppets? Scroll down and go to town. And to join the tribe, hit subscribe. Nerd mistake. Kermit, I'm really not appreciating this silent treatment. You didn't say a single